What if I told you the exact moment the global economy began collapsing wasn't 2008? It wasn't 2020. It wasn't any crisis you lived through. What if I told you it was August 15th, 1971? What if a single speech from a single president silently rewired the world's financial engine and guaranteed that your savings, your salary, your retirement would lose value forever? What if the collapse isn't coming, but has been happening for 53 years straight? Think about your daily reality. Prices rise, debt grows, salaries stagnate, savings shrink. It feels like every generation gets a little poorer than the one before it. Everyone feels it. But nobody really explains it. The truth is simple. It all traces back to one decision. The moment President Nixon cut the dollar loose from gold and turned money into pure belief. Your financial struggle today wasn't created by the markets. It wasn't created by corporations. It wasn't even created by the Federal Reserve alone. It was created by a system built on sand, a currency backed by nothing but trust, in a world that no longer seems to trust anything. Before we continue, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Because this story isn't just about America. When the US changed its money, the entire planet was forced to follow. Subscribe now for the unfiltered truth, because once you understand what happened in 1971, you'll understand why a financial reckoning is not a possibility, but a mathematical certainty. To understand why 1971 broke the world, you need to understand what the world looked like before. Let's go back to 1944. After World War II, the nations of the world gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and created a new financial order. The rules were simple. Every major currency was pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The world trusted dollars because dollars were backed by physical gold stored in US vaults. You could, in theory, walk up to the US Treasury with $35 and walk out with an ounce of gold. This system created stability. It disciplined governments. You couldn't just print money out of thin air because you needed the gold to back it up. But then America made its first fatal mistake. It printed more dollars than it had gold. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern we see today, where the US government prints money far faster than the economy produces actual value. This wasn't a secret. The world was watching. This brings us to the 1960s, the decade of the slow-motion breakdown. While Europe and Asia were busy rebuilding their economies after the war, the US massively expanded its government spending. The Vietnam War was costing a fortune. At home, ambitious social programs and subsidies were launched. America was building and maintaining military bases all over the globe. An incredible amount of money flowed out of the country. And as dollars flowed out, the world's gold started flowing in the opposite direction. Other countries were cashing in their dollar reserves for the real thing, gold. Confidence in the dollar began to collapse. Think about that pattern for a second. Overspending leads to debt, which leads to currency stress. Every modern crisis, from the dot-com bust to 2008 to the inflation we feel today, begins with this same destructive cycle. The seeds were planted right here in the 1960s. Eventually, the world decided to call America's bluff. Countries started demanding their gold back, and they weren't just asking nicely. In 1971, France sent a battleship across the Atlantic. Not a plane, not a diplomatic request. A literal warship to sail into New York Harbor and retrieve its gold reserves. The message was crystal clear. We don't trust your paper dollars anymore. Give us our gold. Other nations quickly followed suit. The drain on US gold reserves became a torrent. Does this sound familiar? In the 2020s, countries like China, Russia, and the other BRICS nations are doing the exact same thing, just more quietly. They are stockpiling gold at a historic pace and systematically dumping US government debt. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The world is once again losing faith in the dollar, just like it did in the late 60s and early 70s. This put President Nixon in an impossible position. He was faced with a choice between two terrible options. Option 1. Admit to the world that the US had printed far too many dollars and couldn't honor its promise. This would have been a moment of national humiliation and would have required severe budget cuts and economic pain to fix the system. Option 2. End the gold standard entirely. Just unilaterally change the rules of the global financial game. Nixon chose the option that bought him time and sold the future. On the evening of August 15, 1971, he went on national television and announced the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. He sold it to the American people as a move to protect the dollar from international speculators. But everyone in the financial world knew what it really meant. The gold window was closed, and temporary became permanent. In that single moment, the very nature of money changed. It stopped being a claim on real, physical value, and it started being a political promise. It became what we now call a fiat currency, backed by nothing more than the full faith and credit of the government. This decision unshackled governments from all fiscal discipline. It gave them a blank check to print as much money as they wanted, whenever they wanted. And for the last 53 years, that's exactly what they've done. This is the root cause of the endless inflation, the ballooning debt, and the slow erosion of your purchasing power. But ending the gold standard wasn't the end of the story. It was only the first half of the trick, because after 1971, the global economy faced a terrifying question. If dollars are backed by nothing, why would any country on earth want to hold them? Why would anyone trade real goods and services for paper that could be printed into oblivion? The dollar was on the verge of collapsing as the world's reserve currency. The US needed a new reason for the world to demand its dollars. The answer became one of the greatest hidden deals in financial history. The birth of the petrodollar system. The US government approached Saudi Arabia, the world's swing producer of oil, behind closed doors. There were no cameras, no public votes, no debate in Congress. The deal was simple and profound. The US offered Saudi Arabia a deal they could not refuse. You agree to sell your oil only in US dollars. In exchange, we will give you advanced military protection and guarantee that we will be a major buyer of your oil. Saudi Arabia agreed. Then, one by one, the rest of the OPEC oil-producing nations followed their lead. In an instant, the game changed again. Every single country on Earth, whether they were friends or foes of the United States, now needed a huge stockpile of US dollars. Why? Because you couldn't buy energy, the lifeblood of a modern economy, without them. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was now the first currency in history backed by oil. This move was a geopolitical masterstroke. It created a permanent, artificial demand for US currency, allowing the US to run massive trade deficits and fund its government spending by simply printing more paper. The rest of the world was essentially forced to finance America's lifestyle. But there's one specific document, a detail that was undisclosed for decades, that proves just how far the US went to lock the world into this petrodollar system. It reveals the mechanics of the secret deal made with the Saudis. You won't believe the name of the government commission that was created to manage this secret flow of money. And the receipt, the proof of this transaction, is wilder than you think. Understanding this history is the key to understanding your present and your future. The system we live in today was born from a crisis, and it is destined to end in one. What if I told you that the economic problems we face today, the constant inflation, the skyrocketing housing prices, the feeling that you're working harder but falling further behind, weren't an accident? What if they were the predictable result of a single decision made over half a century ago? Let's rewind to 1971. The world's financial system was teetering on the edge. President Nixon made a stunning announcement. The US dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. This was a seismic shift. For decades, the dollar's value was anchored to a tangible asset. Now, suddenly it was backed by the full faith and credit of the US government. Immediately, chaos erupted. Trust in the dollar plummeted. Inflation began to explode, not just in America, but globally. Currencies that were pegged to the dollar started to collapse. It looked like the end of American financial dominance. But then, a brilliant, and some would say sinister, plan was hatched. If the dollar couldn't be backed by gold, it would be backed by something else the world desperately needed: oil. Think about it. Oil is the lifeblood of the modern world. It powers our cars, heats our homes, and transports our food. It's essential for manufacturing, shipping, and global trade. By striking deals with major oil-producing nations, particularly Saudi Arabia, the US ensured that global oil sales would be priced exclusively in US dollars. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. Suddenly, every country on Earth, whether friend or foe, needed to acquire and hold US dollars to buy oil. This created a massive, artificial demand for a currency that was now backed by absolutely nothing tangible. The dollar was saved, not by its intrinsic value, but by its gatekeeper role to the world's most critical commodity. The age of the petrodollar had begun, and it fundamentally rewired the global economy. But this new system had a hidden engine, a feature that would become its defining characteristic: debt. Once the dollar was untethered from gold, the only thing limiting its creation was the government's ability to issue debt. Debt stopped being just a way to fund projects. It became the very fuel, foundation, and primary product of the entire financial system. The numbers since 1971 tell a staggering story. US national debt skyrocketed from around $398 billion to over $34 trillion today. That's not a typo, a more than 85-fold increase. During that same period, cumulative inflation has risen by over 600%. A dollar from 1971 now has the purchasing power of about 14 cents. Housing prices? They've soared by an unbelievable 1,700%. A house that cost $25,000 back then would cost nearly $500,000 today. But what about the average person's income? While worker productivity has impressively risen by about 250%, meaning we are all producing far more value with our labor, real wages have remained almost completely flat. You're working smarter and harder, but your paycheck, adjusted for inflation, buys you roughly the same amount it did 50 years ago. All the gains from that increased productivity went somewhere else. This isn't a story of economic failure or mismanagement. It's a story of design. The system is working exactly as it was intended to, concentrating wealth at the top while the value of your labor and savings is quietly eroded. The dollar itself has lost 86% of its value since that fateful decision in 1971. So where did all this money go? The petrodollar system created a river of US dollars flowing into oil-exporting nations. But what do you do with trillions of dollars? You can't just stuff them under a mattress. They needed to be recycled back into the US economy. This is how Wall Street became the center of the world. These petrodollars flooded back into the system through massive purchases of US Treasury bonds, which funded the government's growing deficits. They were poured into US banks, invested in real estate, and used to buy up stocks and other financial assets. This constant, massive inflow of foreign capital acted like a tidal wave of money. It inflated asset prices across the board, from the stock market to housing. It distorted global markets, making debt incredibly cheap and encouraging risky behavior. This cheap debt fueled corporate buyouts, speculative bubbles, and even funded America's global military presence and foreign policy interventions. Every supposed win for the system was a hidden loss for the average citizen. A booming stock market? Great for the top 10%, but for everyone else, it just widened the wealth gap. A strong dollar? It sounded good, but it made American exports more expensive, hollowing out the manufacturing base and shipping jobs overseas. This recycling mechanism ensured that the system benefited those who already held assets while punishing those who relied on a simple paycheck. Over time, this system evolved into something deeply parasitic. It's a closed loop, a cycle that feeds on itself. It begins with money printing by the central bank to fund government spending. This injection of new money into the economy, without a corresponding increase in goods and services, inevitably leads to inflation. Your money loses value. As your purchasing power declines, you become more dependent on debt just to maintain your standard of living. You take out bigger mortgages, car loans, and rack up credit card debt. This growing debt dependence means massive profits for the banking sector, which collects interest on all of it. These enormous banking profits are then funneled back into the political system through lobbying and campaign contributions, ensuring the rules of the game remain favorable. They also fuel more complex and risky financial engineering. derivatives, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations. These are designed to squeeze even more profit out of the system, creating massive, unstable bubbles. Eventually, as we saw in 2008, these bubbles burst. The collapse is catastrophic, but instead of letting the reckless institutions fail, the government and central banks step in with bailouts, citing the need to save the system. And how are these bailouts funded? With more money printing. This brings us right back to the beginning of the cycle, only this time with a larger debt burden and a more fragile foundation. Money printing leads to inflation, which leads to debt, which leads to bubbles, which lead to collapses, which lead to bailouts, which lead to more money printing. It's a doom loop. And here we arrive at the system's fatal flaw. A financial system built on debt can never stand still. It requires infinite growth. If the creation of new debt stops or even slows down significantly, the entire house of cards comes crashing down. Think of it like a shark that has to keep swimming to breathe. If the government stops borrowing, if the central bank stops printing, the consequences are immediate and brutal. Markets would crash as the flow of cheap money dries up. Banks, over-leveraged and dependent on a constant churn of debt, would fail. Governments, unable to finance their deficits, would default. Pensions and retirement accounts would evaporate. Unemployment would explode. This is why, no matter who is in power, the response is always the same: keep the party going. Politicians on both sides of the aisle keep spending and increasing the debt ceiling. The central banks keep the printing presses running, inventing new excuses like quantitative easing to justify inflating the money supply. They are all trapped. They know that stopping means an immediate, catastrophic collapse. But continuing guarantees a different kind of collapse down the road. They are simply kicking the can, making the eventual reckoning even worse. This collapse isn't a possibility. It's a mathematical certainty. The logic is unbreakable. Debt, by its very nature, grows exponentially. It grows much faster than the real economy, or GDP. The interest payments on the national debt begin to snowball, consuming an ever larger portion of the national budget. Government deficits widen, requiring even more borrowing, which accelerates the cycle. Meanwhile, the foundation of the whole system, the petrodollar, is showing cracks. Rival powers like the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively creating parallel systems to trade outside of the dollar. They are settling trades in their own currencies, like the yuan, and exploring new financial instruments, some even hinting at a return to gold-backed trade. Every system in history that was built on exponential, unpayable debt has ended in one of two ways. Either a brutal, hyperinflationary collapse where the currency becomes worthless, or a systemic reset, often accompanied by widespread social and political upheaval. There are no other outcomes. The decision made in 1971 wasn't just a minor policy tweak. It was a civilization-altering event. It guaranteed a future of permanent inflation, ensuring your savings would always be losing value. It guaranteed permanent debt, both for the government and for individuals. It guaranteed permanent currency decay and financial instability, lurching from one crisis to the next. It made our entire society dependent on crisis management by the very people who created the crisis. It guaranteed the permanent erosion of real wealth for the working and middle classes. You are not just living through a period of bad luck or economic headwinds. You are living through the logical, predictable, 53-year-long aftermath of a single decision. A decision that turned money from a store of value into a mere belief and then turned that belief into a liability. So before you click away, ask yourself this question. If the system truly began its terminal decline in 1971, and the math guarantees its eventual failure, how much time do we really have left? If this message resonates with you, share this video. The more people who understand the truth about our money, the better prepared we can be. And make sure to subscribe, because we are just scratching the surface. Thanks for watching.